Ethan Walker had learned the hard way that when Claire Monroe asked for something, it was never simple. Nothing in her world was. Every meeting carried hidden meaning. Every invitation came with invisible strings. Still, when she told him there would be a small dinner with senior partners, he believed her, because he needed to. He always needed to. 7 o'clock, Claire had said, standing beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of her 43rd floor office. The late afternoon sun wrapped her in a warm glow that almost made her look gentle. Almost. The address is already in your calendar. Ethan glanced at his phone. The pin wasn't a restaurant. It was a residential neighborhood. He hesitated. Is everything okay? Claire asked, her voice calm but sharp, the way it always was when she was really asking. Are you about to say no? My daughter, Ethan began. Thursday nights are usually... I'll make it quick, she said. I really need you there. Ethan swallowed. 6-year-old Lily was waiting at home, probably sitting on the kitchen floor with her coloring pencils, expecting him to come back and make pizza the way he did every Thursday. He thought about calling their neighbor, Mrs. Reynolds, again. It meant another $20 he didn't really have. But saying no to Claire Monroe, CEO, billionaire, the woman who signed his paycheck, wasn't a risk a single dad could afford. I'll be there, he said. Claire nodded, satisfied, and turned back to the city skyline, as if the decision had never mattered. At 6:40, Ethan pulled into a quiet, wealthy neighborhood where every driveway looked like it belonged in a magazine. Tall trees lined the streets. Elegant houses hid behind wrought iron gates and manicured hedges. This was not where business dinners happen. Ethan adjusted his tie, feeling suddenly underdressed in his off-the-rack suit, and walked up to the door. Claire opened it herself. She looked different. Gone was the sharp blazer and corporate armor. Instead, she wore a soft cream sweater, and her hair fell loosely around her shoulders. For a split second, Ethan forgot how to speak. Come in, she said, stepping aside. Something about her tone made his stomach tighten. The house smelled like polished wood and money. He followed her down a hallway lined with framed family photos. Claire as a child, Claire in boarding school, Claire at graduations he could never imagine attending. And then they entered the dining room. 2 people sat at the long table. Ethan recognized them instantly. Robert and Margaret Monroe, Claire's parents. His chest went cold. There were no business partners, no executives, no colleagues. This was a family dinner. Claire, he started, but before he could finish, her hand slipped under the table and gripped his wrist, tight and desperate. Mom, Dad, she said, her voice unnaturally steady. This is my boyfriend, Ethan Walker. Time froze. Robert Monroe rose slowly from his chair, tall and dignified. Ah, so this is the man who's been keeping my daughter so busy. Ethan forced a polite smile and shook his hand. It's nice to meet you, sir. Margaret studied him like a diamond appraiser examining a cheap stone. Please sit. We've been waiting to meet you. Ethan wanted to run. Instead, he sat. Claire's hand rested on his knee under the table, a silent plea. Please don't leave me alone in this. Dinner began, though Ethan barely tasted a thing. So, Ethan, Margaret said sweetly, what do you do? I work with Claire, he replied carefully. I help manage her schedule and operations. And your family? Robert asked. I have a daughter, Lily. She's 6. Margaret's eyebrows lifted just slightly. Her mother? Not in the picture, Ethan said. It's just us. A quiet, heavy pause fell over the table. Claire jumped in quickly. Lily is amazing, smart, creative. Ethan is an incredible father. I've never seen anyone so devoted. Ethan stared at her. She had never even met Lily. Yet the way she spoke, it sounded real. After dessert, Robert invited Ethan into his study for a drink. The room smelled like old leather and expensive whiskey. I'll be direct, Robert said. My daughter's life is complicated. Anyone with her needs to be strong enough for that. Ethan nodded. I know I'm not from your world. I don't have the money or the connections, but I care about Claire. To his own surprise, it was true. Robert watched him for a long moment. We'll see. Outside, under the soft porch lights, Claire finally exhaled. I'm sorry, she whispered. I know that was unfair. They won't stop trying to marry me off. I just needed them to believe something. So you used me, Ethan said quietly. Yes, she admitted, because I trust you. He shook his head, exhausted. One night, Claire, that's it. One night, she agreed. But as Ethan drove home through the dark, watching the city blur past, he had the uneasy feeling that nothing about this was going to be that simple. And somewhere inside him, Something fragile had already begun to shift. Ethan barely slept that night. The glow of Lily's nightlight spilled across her small bedroom as he stood in the doorway, watching her breathe. Her stuffed rabbit was tucked under her chin, one small hand curled around its ear. She looked peaceful, innocent, completely unaware that her father had just pretended to be a billionaire's boyfriend at a dinner table filled with quiet judgment and polished silverware. He rubbed his tired eyes. This wasn't who he was. He didn't lie. He didn't play games. He fixed things, showed up on time, packed lunches, and paid bills late, but always paid them. That world, Claire Monroe's world of elegant deception and emotional chess, was never meant to touch Lily. Yet somehow it already had. By the time Ethan walked into Claire's office the next morning, he had decided one thing. It was over. One night, done. But Claire was standing by her desk with her phone in her hand. Her usual confident posture cracked by something that looked dangerously close to anxiety. "My mother just called," she said without greeting him. "She wants to have dinner again. This Friday, at their country club." Ethan froze. "No," he said flatly. "You promised one night." "I know what I said," Claire replied, stepping closer. "But they loved you. My mother's already told 3 of her friends I'm seeing someone. If this suddenly ends, it'll be worse than before." "That's not my problem," Ethan snapped. "You lied to them. You deal with it." Claire's jaw tightened. "You don't understand them. Every holiday, every phone call, every birthday turns into an interrogation about my love life. They don't hear me when I say I don't want what they want." Ethan crossed his arms. "So now you want to drag my daughter into this?" At that, Claire's voice softened. "I would never hurt Lily. I just need time. A few months. Enough for them to believe this is real so they finally back off." Ethan turned toward the window. 40 stories below, people were crossing the street with coffee cups and grocery bags, living normal lives where lies didn't involve private jets and family legacies. "How long?" he asked quietly. 6 months, Claire said. "Maybe less." Ethan shook his head. "You're asking me to pretend to be something I'm not, to build a fake relationship around my kid." "I'm asking you to help me breathe," she said, "and I'll pay you 30% more than your current salary." The number hit him like a punch to the ribs. 30%. That meant Lily's school wouldn't have to be the cheapest one anymore. It meant doctor visits without panic. It meant not lying awake at night wondering what would happen if his car broke down. Claire knew exactly where to aim. "This is wrong," Ethan said, but the words didn't sound as strong as they should have. "I know," she replied softly, "but I'm still asking." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Ethan sighed. "We set rules, boundaries. The second Lily's uncomfortable, I'm out." Claire nodded. "Agreed." They sat down and mapped out their fake relationship like a business contract. How long they'd been dating, what they liked about each other, where they'd gone together. Every lie carefully built on top of the last. And with every detail, Ethan felt himself stepping deeper into something he didn't fully understand. Friday night came too fast. The country club was exactly what Ethan imagined. Pristine lawns, glowing windows, expensive laughter drifting through the air. Claire met him at the entrance in a navy blue dress that somehow managed to look both powerful and elegant. "We've been together 3 months," she whispered. "Just follow my lead." Margaret and Robert Monroe were seated with 2 other wealthy couples. Claire slipped her arm through Ethan's like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Mom, Dad," she said brightly, "you remember Ethan." Margaret smiled warmly. "Of course, we were hoping you'd come again." Conversation flowed around real estate, philanthropy, and international travel. Ethan nodded, answered politely, and stayed quiet. During dinner, Margaret leaned closer. "We'd love to meet Lily sometime. Perhaps brunch?" Ethan felt Claire's foot press gently against his under the table. "She'd love that," he said. The lie came out smooth. Later in the parking lot, Claire looked at him with visible relief. "You did great." "I'm not sure great is the word," Ethan muttered, but something in the way she smiled, grateful, almost vulnerable, made his chest tighten. And for the first time since this mess began, he wondered if pretending might be more dangerous than he thought, because it was starting to feel a little too easy. By the time October rolled in, Ethan barely remembered what it felt like before the lie. His weeks had fallen into a strange double life. From Monday through Friday, he was the same efficient, soft-spoken executive assistant, managing Claire Monroe's brutal schedule with steady, reliable precision. He ordered flights, handled crises, and kept her entire empire running smoothly. But every Friday night, he became something else. He became her boyfriend. It started with dinners, then weekend charity galas, then a private art showing. Every event required a new layer of fiction, where they met, what they liked about each other, what kind of future they were quietly building. Ethan learned the details by heart, afraid one small mistake would shatter everything. What unsettled him most was how natural it began to feel. Claire was different outside the office. Without the boardroom and the billion-dollar pressure on her shoulders, she laughed more. Her smile was warmer, less guarded. Sometimes she told stories about growing up with tutors instead of friends, about being raised to succeed but never taught how to rest. Ethan listened, and he found himself wanting to. One Friday night after a charity dinner, they sat in the back of a hired car, rain streaking the windows. Claire leaned her head against the seat, eyes closed. "You okay?" Ethan asked. "Tired," she admitted, "of being watched all the time." "You don't have to pretend with me," he said. Her eyes opened slowly. For a moment, she just looked at him. "That's the problem," she whispered. "With you, I don't know where the pretending ends anymore." The words stayed with him long after he dropped her off. The turning point came on a quiet Sunday morning. Margaret had insisted on brunch with Lily. Ethan spent more time getting Lily ready than he cared to admit. He smoothed her hair, fixed her dress, and knelt in front of her. "Miss Monroe from work is going to be there," he said gently. "She's nice. Just be yourself." Lily nodded solemnly, clutching her small purse. They met at a downtown cafe with big windows and soft music. Claire was already there with her parents. When she saw Lily, something in her face changed, a softness Ethan had never seen before. "You must be Lily," Claire said, kneeling down. "I've heard so much about you." Lily smiled shyly. "Dad says you're really smart." Claire glanced up at Ethan, surprised, then smiled back at Lily. "That's very kind of him." Brunch unfolded easily. Lily talked about school, her butterfly project, and her favorite cartoon. Claire listened like every word mattered. When Lily spilled juice, Claire calmly handed her a napkin before Margaret could make it awkward. Ethan watched, stunned. Claire wasn't pretending. Afterward, they walked through a nearby park. Lily ran ahead, chasing ducks. Claire walked beside Ethan in the crisp fall air. "She's wonderful," Claire said quietly. "She's my whole world," Ethan replied. "I can see that," Claire said. "The way you look at her, it's one of my favorite things about you." The words were too honest, too dangerous. That night, after Lily was asleep, Ethan stared at his phone. A text from Claire lit up the screen. "Thank you for today. I mean it." He didn't know what to say. Because somewhere between the lies and the laughter, he was falling for her. And that was the one thing he was never supposed to do. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, quiet and deadly. Ethan was at his desk sorting through Claire's calendar when his phone buzzed. The sender was Human Resources, Legal Division. The subject line read, "Confidential, immediate review required." His stomach tightened. 10 minutes later, he was sitting in a glass-walled conference room across from a woman named Karen Brooks, a sharp-eyed corporate attorney with a thick folder on the table between them. She slid the folder open. Inside were photographs. Ethan and Claire walking into the country club. Ethan holding Claire's hand at a charity gala. Ethan, Claire, and Lily at brunch in the park. Someone had been watching. "These were submitted anonymously," Karen said evenly. "They raise a serious concern of a conflict of interest. You are Claire Monroe's direct report. Are you in a romantic relationship with her?" Ethan's mouth went dry. This was the moment. The moment he could tell the truth. The moment he could say it was all fake. But in his mind, he saw Claire's face, her parents, the shame, the humiliation, the way the board would tear her apart for using an employee like a prop. "Yes," he said quietly, "we are." Karen nodded once, as if she'd expected it. "Then company policy requires action. Ms. Monroe will need to confirm. You cannot continue working directly under someone you're romantically involved with." Claire was called in minutes later. She sat beside Ethan, calm on the surface, but her jaw was tense. Karen laid out the evidence again. "Are you in a relationship with Mr. Walker?" Karen asked. Claire looked at Ethan. And then she said yes. The word felt heavier than it should have. "Then Mr. Walker must either be reassigned or terminated," Karen continued. "Those are the options." Ethan's heart pounded. Reassignment meant losing everything he'd built. Termination meant no job at all. No safety net. No Lily school. No rent security. Karen left them alone. "I'm so sorry," Claire whispered. "I never meant for this to happen." "Someone wanted it to happen," Ethan replied. "They set us up." "We'll fix it," Claire said urgently. "I'll move you to another department." "It won't be the same," Ethan said, "and you know it." Karen returned. Ethan took a breath. I'll resign, effective immediately. Claire stared at him. Ethan, it's cleaner, he said. For you, for the company. The words hurt coming out. That afternoon, Ethan cleared his desk. Claire stood in her office, eyes glassy, as he handed in his badge. You can't just walk away, she said. You need this job. I need my daughter, Ethan replied, and I won't let her be collateral damage. Claire's voice cracked. These last few months, they weren't fake to me. Ethan swallowed. Then stop pretending. Tell your parents the truth. Silence hung between them. For the first time, neither of them knew what to do next. Ethan didn't go home right away after he resigned. He sat in his car in the underground garage, hands resting on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. The familiar, dependable rhythm of his life had just collapsed. No paycheck, no routine, no quiet certainty that Lily would be okay next month. All because he had pretended to be someone he wasn't. By the time he picked Lily up from after-school care, he had forced a smile onto his face. She ran into his arms like she always did, small and radiant, as if the world had never been cruel. Daddy, did you have a good day? She asked. Yes, sweetheart, he said, voice steady. I did. That night, as Lily colored at the kitchen table, Ethan's phone rang. It was Claire. I told them, she said without preamble. Her voice was shaky but determined. My parents, everything. The lie, the arrangement, you. Ethan closed his eyes. How bad was it? My mother cried. My father was furious, but they listened. She took a breath. Now my dad wants to meet you. Alone. Tomorrow. Ethan's heart sank. Claire, that's a terrible idea. I know, she said softly. But I need you to do it anyway, please. After a long pause, he agreed. The next morning, Ethan sat across from Robert Monroe in a quiet downtown coffee shop. No luxury, no grand table, just two men and the truth. My daughter told me everything, Robert said. Why should I believe anything you say now? You shouldn't, Ethan replied, but I'll still tell you the truth. He spoke about Lily, about how she came first, about how he never wanted Claire's money or status, about how the lie started out of desperation but turned into something he didn't expect. I care about your daughter, Ethan said. I don't know where that leads. I just know it's real. Robert studied him for a long moment. Then he sighed. I don't like how this began, but I like even less the idea of my daughter being alone in a world that only sees her bank account. He extended his hand. Ethan shook it. That evening, Ethan went to Claire's apartment. When she opened the door, she looked nervous, vulnerable, and more human than ever. My dad gave you a chance, she whispered. So did I, Ethan said. They stood there unsure until Claire stepped forward. No more pretending, she said. No more lies. Ethan kissed her. And for the first time, it wasn't an act. 3 months passed quietly, so quietly that sometimes Ethan forgot how chaotic everything had once been. Every morning, he woke up in Claire's sunlit apartment, listening to Lily's soft footsteps as she padded into the kitchen. He made pancakes while Claire poured coffee, her hair still messy, her sharp executive edge replaced by something warm and unguarded. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't dramatic, but it felt real, and that made all the difference. Ethan had landed a new job at a mid-sized operations firm downtown. The pay was solid, the hours reasonable. For the first time in years, he wasn't holding his breath every time he checked his bank account. Lily started attending a better school, one where teachers smiled more and classrooms felt brighter. Life wasn't perfect, but it was stable, and stability had always been Ethan's quiet dream. Claire had changed too. She still ran her billion-dollar company with that fearless, laser-focused intensity, but something inside her had softened. She laughed more. She took weekends off. Sometimes she even let Ethan make decisions without needing to control every detail. Something no boardroom had ever managed to teach her. One Saturday afternoon, Lily sat at the kitchen table with a box of crayons, drawing carefully. Claire leaned over her shoulder. What are you making? She asked. A house, Lily said proudly, with 3 people. Ethan glanced over. In the picture, a man, a woman, and a little girl stood in front of a yellow house with a red door. That's you and Daddy and me, Lily explained. Claire felt her throat tighten. She looked at Ethan, a silent question in her eyes. He smiled back. Not big, not flashy, just honest. Yes, Claire said softly. That's us. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, Claire stood on the balcony watching the city lights. Ethan wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. Do you ever think about how this started? She asked. A lie? A fake relationship? A deal that could have destroyed everything? All the time, Ethan replied. And yet, here we are. Ethan took her hand. Sometimes the messiest beginnings lead to the strongest foundations. Claire laughed quietly. Trust you to make something broken sound hopeful. I'm just a single dad who learned that love doesn't always come in clean, pretty packages, he said. Sometimes it shows up disguised as chaos. Claire turned to face him, eyes shining. Are you scared? Every day, Ethan admitted. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. They kissed under the city's soft glow. No contracts, no pretending, just two imperfect people choosing each other. And that raises a question for you, the viewer. If you were in Ethan's place, would you have taken the risk? Would you have protected your child, even if it meant stepping into a lie that could cost you everything? And when that lie turned into something real, would you have had the courage to hold on to it? Some stories end with wealth, some end with romance, but the best ones end with something even more powerful, a family. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more emotional, unforgettable stories about love, sacrifice, and the courage to choose what truly matters.